So welcome everybody to this actually quite timely RSA webinar. The census is just about 2 weeks away on the 10th of August. And so this census is going to be a really important one for those of us who are really interested in accuracy in the data for the census, and particularly when it comes to the religion question. My name is Dr. Meredith Doig. I'm president of the Rationalist Society, Australia's oldest free thought group. We have people joining us from all over Australia, from Perth to far north Queensland, but I'd like to extend a really warm welcome, I hope they are with us, to some rationalists who are joining us from Canada. So welcome in particular to you. Now, just a few housekeeping matters before we get going. If you do have questions for our guest speaker, who I'll introduce in a sec, please jot them down in the chat box below, and we'll get to those in the second half of the presentation. The webinar will be recorded, so if you happen to miss any of it, we'll let you know when it's ready to view on our YouTube channel. Now, for our guest speaker, Michael Dove. He's a former academic, a business leader running his own consultancy business, and he's a member of the Humanists Victoria. Since 2006, he's worked on a range of cultural diversity projects for many organisations. And the founder of one of these organisations said this of Mike's consultancy, and I quote, he said, "They're super responsive, meticulously thorough, and go the extra mile to ensure customer satisfaction." I don't know whether, Mike, you knew that somebody said that to you. Anyway, look, at a fairly late stage in the process, Mike very kindly agreed to take on the being project team leader for the Census No Religion campaign, which is a collaborative project between a number of free thought groups, atheists, humanists, rationalists and secularists. And I must say, as the project team leader for this group of cats who are a bit hard to herd together, I must say that he is meticulously thorough and super responsive, and he does go that extra mile. Mike will speak for about 30 minutes, then we'll have 30 minutes for Q&A, and if you do have a question, please use the chat box down below, and we'll go through as many as we can in the second half of the presentation. So with that, Mike, over to you.
Thank you, Meredith, and thank you for that introduction. Let me just do the screen share. I do propose to be using a series of slides. That helps keep me on track and hopefully helps you understand that I'm on track. But before I sort of formally start, I would like to begin by recognising that I'm presenting this webinar on the lands of the Wurundjeri people, and I acknowledge them as traditional owners. I also pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to pay my respects to traditional owners of other lands represented by attendees of this evening's webinar. And I guess that includes our Indigenous friends from Canada, if indeed they have managed to join us. I'd also, making this acknowledgement of country reminds me how far we've come since Indigenous Australians were first counted as people in the national census. And this year actually marks the 50th anniversary of the first time that Aboriginal people were counted in the census. So I think it's a significant milestone. This presentation, however, is not specifically about Indigenous Australians, but it does focus on the 2021 census, which will be conducted really starting today and over the next 2 weeks. It's really the first time that the census has been conducted over a period of time rather than being an attempt to be focused on just one night. I don't know whether that's because the ABS are a bit nervous about their technology this time around, or whether it's because they're trying to be more inclusive and accepting of people's needs for flexibility. We'll wait and see. Okay, a particular focus for me and the rest of the, and I have to say, superbly skilled and committed campaign team that I'm working with is, of course, the question on religion. Let me go to full screen. The agenda which I've set for this meeting really covers a range of things. The first thing I want to talk about is some information and some problems with the religion question, and to highlight why it's important for people to answer this question carefully. Then what I'm going to do is to highlight two segments of the population, one which is quite sizable and the other which represents an important niche, where there's an opportunity to improve the accuracy of the results overall. And then I'm going to close by making a few remarks about the campaign and our hopes for what the results will show when they're published next year. Those who attended last month's webinar will recall Neil Francis in his presentation, and he began his religiosity in Australia presentation by stating how census data significantly overstates Australians' involvement with religion. Or to put it another way, which is the perspective that I'm taking tonight, how the census significantly understates those who have no religion. He rightly pointed out that the shortcomings of the question which seek to measure religious affiliation. This is the paper version of question 23 in this year's census. The online version is actually available from today, and I've managed to include one of those just in a couple of slides' time. But you can see what the question is. It states quite clearly, what is the person's religion? Now, any pollster or social researcher will recognise that the census question, what is the person's religion, is inherently biased. It presumes that a person has a religion. And there are various ways this bias can be avoided. Neil, for example, suggested last month that the simplest way is to add, if any. So the question becomes, what is the person's religion, if any? Others believe that two questions are needed, like the approach taken in Northern Ireland, where one question asks about your current religion and the other asks about the religion in which you were brought up. So this is one form of bias associated with this question, but there's another form of bias. This is a consequence of the questions immediately preceding the religion question. These questions seek to identify aspects of people's cultural background. So we have questions asking about such things as the country of birth, how long it is since they arrived in Australia, the parents' country of birth, what language they may speak at home, and most tellingly, ancestry. The ancestry question encourages people to reflect on their cultural origins, evoking fundamental sentiments about aspects of their cultural identity. In this way, a context is created which conditions the response to the question on religion. For those who may see religious background as a defining dimension of their culture, so for example, Sikhs or Judaism, Eastern Orthodox or others, it's most likely they will mark a religion that is compatible with their culture, even though, for all practical purposes, they've long since stopped practicing the religion or believing in its teachings. This is the online of a question completed by somebody in my family and submitted about 3 hours ago. I was very pleased when they sent it to me because it indicates that they've made the correct choice. But my point is that the presumptive bias about the question is compounded by a contextual bias for the question, and therefore it's likely to influence the results. But what's the ABS's position on the question? The first thing to say is that in the ABS's documentation on the Australian Standard Classification of Religious Groups, which is what's used to code all the responses to this question, the ABS draws on the 1983 definition given in a landmark ruling by the High Court of Australia. It stated that the criteria of religion are twofold. Firstly, a belief in a supernatural being, thing, or principle. And secondly, the acceptance of canons of conduct which give effect to that belief. So according to the High Court, belief in something supernatural is important, as is what could be interpreted as practice. Now, the ABS acknowledges in its documentation elsewhere, it acknowledges that this position in what it calls its nominal definition. So you can see that it defines religion as the spiritual beliefs and practices to which a person adheres, or the religious group to which the person belongs. Not a lot different, really, to the High Court statement. Now, what they've also done is to create an operational definition, which is much looser and introduces the word affiliation. Now, according to the dictionary, the word affiliation means a close or official connection, or a connection with a political party or religion. So what does connection mean? Well, in short, it's open to wide interpretation about the depth and strength of connection in everyday usage. And we could argue that this wide scope of interpretation sits nicely with some organisations. If we look at the Census topics and data release plan published by the ABS, they sort of move away a bit from the High Court definition. The Census collects information on religious affiliation rather than religious involvement, and will continue to do so in 2021, it reminds us. And this is consistent with international practice and aligns, would you believe it, with the delivery and planning needs of religious organisations. Right, so it's all about the needs of religious organisations, however questionable those needs might be. But whatever the needs of government, what about the needs of government and a taxpayer, and those who seek to promote the separation of church and state? Here, we have a question in a government-run demographic survey that is largely designed to serve the needs, as it says here, of religious organisations. And in the backgrounder to the question, the ABS muddies the water further by offering woolly guidance based on imprecise definitions. Again, around the use of this word, affiliation. In what appears to be a blatant attempt to boost numbers further in the question-specific help available to us punters next week, the ABS states it can mean the core values the person aligns himself to, even if they don't actively participate in services or pray. So the ABS seems to be bending over backwards to accommodate a powerful lobby. The URL, which I've circled there, reveals the fact that the ABS sees the data on religion as an indicator of cultural background. As with the placement of the question in a cultural diversity topic, at the end of a sequence of clear-cut questions on cultural background, the ABS justifies it as a measure of multiculturalism. Not that there's anything wrong with measuring multiculturalism, I'm all for it. In fact, a lot of my business is connected with measuring multiculturalism. But it's clear that the ABS takes the view that the resultant data is little more than an interesting indicator of cultural diversity, and largely from a backward-looking perspective, encouraging people to identify with their upbringing. It doesn't seem to matter whether it tells us anything useful about the current religiosity of Australians. So the difference between the 1983 High Court definition of what it takes to be religious and the way the ABS frames the census question on religion shows very little connection, or dare I say, affiliation. The problem with affiliation is that it's rubbery. It means different things to different people, and it means different things to different points in time. In the Australia of the 1950s and 60s, I suspect there was a much closer association between religious affiliation and practice. At that time, they could almost have been taken as synonymous. Society, of course, has moved on, and much more so than the vested interests who benefit from a blurred distinction that results in an overstatement of the current commitment to religion. So why does it matter? Well, the fact is the data is misused and misinterpreted, intentionally and otherwise. A biased question will produce biased results. In 2016, 29.6% of respondents chose no religion, close to 7 million people. And as we know from Neil Francis' presentation last week, respected surveys of Australian public constantly show that the census data significantly misrepresents the status of religion in Australia. The Australian Electoral Survey, AES, in 2019 recorded more than 40% no religion. The Australian Values Survey in 2018, which had unbiased wording, recorded more than 50% with no religion. Rightly or wrongly, census data is the gold standard measure of religion in Australia. It is used by religious organisations, politicians and administrators to justify the allocation of public funding, subsidies, tax exemptions for things like education, healthcare, aged care, so-called chaplaincy, policy positioning, and voice. For the simple reason of fairness, it's critically important that these decisions are based on accurate data. Well, what do the children think? I'd now like to turn attention to two features of the Census 21 campaign where we're promoting the opportunity to improve the accuracy of the count. They're not necessarily the largest opportunities for growing the no religion vote, but we believe they're important segments containing people who do not currently have the freedom to speak for themselves. Both are about empowering unheard, and when it comes to recording accurate answers to the census, disadvantaged people in Australian society. Bear with me, for those that are less familiar for the census, I'd just like to provide a little bit of context for the section which is following. The basics of the census are that there are three statistical units. There's the dwelling, which includes things like the number of bedrooms, motor vehicles, whether it's owned or rented, etc. The household, if there is one, within the dwelling. You can have unoccupied dwellings. And thirdly, the person within the household. The distinction between those is quite important, I think, as you'll see from the next part. The default mode of collecting census data is via the household form. This is normally completed by the household reference person, and this person is the householder who is identified as person 1 in the form. The household reference person is normally the person who records personal information on behalf of all members of the household. They also record things like who was present on census night and the relationship between individuals within the household. Personal information covers things like income, education, cultural background, and this year, questions on health. And of course, religion is an attribute of the person. This chart shows the percentage of people by 5-year age group who choosing no religion in the 2016 census. The dotted line just here represents the figure of 29.6% that I referenced just now. Clearly, there's a marked skew towards younger people choosing no religion, and particularly the under 40s. But within that, we see that the under 15s appear to mirror the pattern of their parents, hence these two circled areas. Although curiously, actually, this is a slight bit of amusement for me, it looks like the parents are actually slightly less religious than the children. This chart shows the same data, but with an overlay in orange, which shows the growth rate of no religion over the 10-year period from 2006 to 2016. The dashed orange line here is referring to the average national growth rate over that period of people choosing no religion of 61% over that period of 2006 to 2016. And you can see that the stronger growth rates are actually with an older demographic, people aged 50 to 70. As an aside, we might speculate that these people are reflecting on the meaning of life. Perhaps they are internalizing progressive social change, indicated by such things as voluntary assisted dying, marriage equality, or they're confronting challenges that have been presented to us, such as institutional child abuse and conversion therapy. And over the last 15 years, they're rejecting the leadership of clerics who seem increasingly out of touch with contemporary society and the direction it's taking. The under 15s, while showing some of the highest no religion rates, also show some of the lowest growth rates of that choice. I think that situation should change. Moving on from the overall age dimensions of religion, when we zoom into the detail for the 4.4 million under 15s, we see a steady increase in the proportion of people belonging to a formal religion. Of course, this is reflected in a steady decline of the blue lines, which are showing the decline in no religion. So, of course, formal religion goes up, no religion goes down. The not stated and the inadequately described are pretty constant along through the age groups. The under 15s, while showing some of the high, sorry, I think I've made that point. Now you may recall the High Court definition, which I read out a little earlier, which says what it takes to be religious: belief in something supernatural and acceptance of the canons of conduct. The staggering thing for me is how the majority of the 4.4 million children, in many cases well over 50%, believe in something supernatural and accept the canons of conduct. Unless the religions that are referred to, in fact, include Father Christmas and the Tooth Fairy, in which case it might make a little bit of sense. Even the Catholic Church in Canon 97 acknowledges that a child is not able to use reason and begin to have moral responsibility until the completion of their 7th year. Educators would argue it's much later before a child is capable of abstract thinking. The United Nations Convention on Human Rights, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, ratified by Australia in 1990, enshrines a range of basic rights for children. Article 14 states that children have the right to choose their own religion and beliefs, while Article 30 provides that children have a right to practice the culture, language, and religion of their choosing. Richard Dawkins, in The God Delusion, calls the imposition of a religion child abuse, while Nicholas Humphrey, in his What Do We Tell the Children paper, champions the right of children to develop their own personhood. In the census, parents and carers should do the right thing and not simply record their own religion for the child's response. If possible, ask the children, and if they don't know or they're too young to decide, they should be recorded as no religion. This, I think, would make a significant difference to the proportion of people recorded as no religion in the census outcomes. I want to highlight 4 factors contributing to an opportunity for more accurate, more complete data in other contexts other than children. Firstly, advances in technology over the past 20 years have seen an explosion, of course, in the number of surveys we're presented with, whether for customer satisfaction, product review, vox pop, or well-structured social research. We're conditioned to provide our opinions, and almost without exception, we're happy to provide them. And of course, almost all of them are online. The ABS recognises this, and completion of the 2021 census is expected to be overwhelmingly online, with more than 75% of occupied dwellings likely to submit their responses this way. Of course, with continuing COVID uncertainty and the New South Wales lockdown, there's every chance the ABS expectations will be comfortably exceeded. My guess is that the vast majority of Sydney's residents already know probably where they're going to be on census night of the 10th of August, will have submitted their forms by the end of next week. The advance of technology, even at the ABS, presents an opportunity for all people, not just the household reference person who fills out the form on behalf of others, to be correctly recorded. I'll come back to that point later. Secondly, with online usage and sharing of personal data comes online literacy. Consumers, particularly the young people, now have far greater awareness of their rights relating to privacy and confidentiality and how they control them. They don't want to be misrepresented. Thirdly, with increased sensitivity about certain questions, e.g. the person's sex, and I note that this year, for the first time, an option is going to be available for non-binary sex. So the person's sex, their income, aspects of their health, and of course religion are all sensitive questions. And it's clear that the traditional model of census completion via the household form and the household reference person needs to evolve. A fourth factor is related to the number of non-stated responses. In 2016, the overall non-response rate to the census was 5.2%, remarkably low by international standards. As expected, the non-response rate to specific questions varies. The 3 highest were religion, shown in grey, and that is the only optional question, by the way. Income is not far behind, and number of children born is the 3rd highest of the non-stated questions. So although only marginally higher than the 2 highest compulsory questions, not stated for religion still comprises 2.1 million people, about whom we can draw no conclusions on their views of religion. I believe it's an objective of the campaign to try to encourage people to reflect on whether not stated is the best choice to reflect their religion, or whether in fact they should be looking at no religion as an option. It's in everybody's interest to minimise the non-response rate for the question on religion. It will give more accurate data. It will be a better resource for informing the public funding allocations. Similarly, we want the responses to be as accurate as possible and make sure all people have the opportunity for their preference to be correctly recorded. So these four factors, the advances in technology, the heightened awareness about privacy, increased sensitivity of certain questions, and a not stated figure of 9.1%, they all present opportunities for personal data to be correctly recorded and to more accurately reflect Australian demography. As previously stated, the household reference person, or person one, normally completes the personal details for all persons in the household. And it's no longer appropriate to assume that it's okay in all cases for one person to complete the census on behalf of all persons in the household. Consider these scenarios. What if I'm in a group or share household and I want to ensure my personal beliefs are properly recorded? And I don't want others to know that I share my household with. I don't want them to know what my choice of religion is, or indeed how I identify my sex, or my health status, or my income. Furthermore, what if I live in a family household where there's a strong power imbalance? Perhaps my partner makes assumptions about my religiosity that are inconsistent with my real view. I don't wish to discuss those views for the fear of the consequences in an otherwise stable relationship. Of even greater significance, what if I'm a teenager or a young adult living at home in a conservatively religious household? I do not share my parents' Islamic or Hindu or Jewish or fundamentally Christian views and practices, choose which applies, and I want to recall my own preference as part of forming and asserting my own identity. To argue my case would be disrespectful and cause family disharmony. But I've knocked the ABS a little bit earlier in this presentation, but I'll give credit where credit is due. And to the credit of the ABS, the option to request and complete a separate individual personal form and to record your own personal data online or on paper is now more explicit. The FAQ that I've reproduced in the slide is from the household census form. It was printed months ago, and it implies you may only request a paper form. This was the case in previous censuses and was generally only promoted as an option for people living in group and shared households. The extra form or forms were only delivered to the address of the household by a census collection officer or by the local postie, potentially for all in the household to see. It was also incumbent upon the person who wanted to fill out a separate form, I find this unbelievable, to inform the head of household that a separate personal form was being completed. This was to help the ABS minimise the amount of manual reconciliation and processing once all the forms have been collected. Fortunately, their technology has moved on. So there was no recognition of the fact that a person requesting the form may have wanted to keep knowledge of that request private and confidential. Over the past 3 months, I've engaged with senior people at the ABS, and I'm pleased to report that they've listened. It's now possible to request a separate census number to enable you to complete the form online. Again, to the credit of the ABS, new automated reconciliation processes have been defined to ensure the data submitted on a personal form will take precedence over personal data submitted on behalf of that person on a household form. The ABS Census website pages, FAQs, Do Your Census help page, and the privacy and security pages, they all reference the option to separately and individually complete the census. Any member of a household, indeed even a visitor of any age, can ask for their own individual login number for the online form, or a separate paper form and envelope if they want to fill in the form privately. To further ensure privacy and confidentiality, the separate paper form can be sent to any address, not just the one where the respondent lives, thereby meaning that the postie or the census collection officer is not involved in delivering it to the address. Lockdowns permitted, it could also be completed at one of several ABS information hubs scattered across the major cities and in regional areas. It'd be fair to say that they do tend to be concentrated in areas where there are special needs, such as language. There's one catch to being able to fill out your own form. To meet the back-end processing rules, the separately completed form needs to be at least as complete as the information completed on behalf of that person on the household form. So for anyone completing the individual form, they need to be sure that all questions are answered, and there are a lot of them. Although I was informed earlier on that it takes just 5 minutes to complete the whole form. So consider the issues of, say, an Islamic 20-year-old whose fears for the parents' displeasure. I think that what this does is actually give them a way to have themselves correctly represented and accurately recorded. In the scenarios previously described, it's important that the act of choosing to complete a separate individual form is in itself private and confidential. The mechanism for requesting an individual form now protects the individual's privacy and confidentiality to the same extent as the information that's provided. The ABS has responded to these needs, both in terms of the process for requesting an online code or separate form, and in making sure that the back-end processing gives priority to a separately completed individual form over a household form completed on that person's behalf. I think that's significant progress. I'd now like to lead into the questions and discussion part of the webinar by saying a little about the campaign we are running. As Meredith mentioned earlier, the campaign is a coalition of free-thinking organisations in Australia: humanists, atheists, rationalists, and the National Secular Lobby. The campaign positions itself as not being anti-religious. It's not about deconverting people. It's really the positioning of the campaign is to encourage people to reflect on their own religiosity and to, if necessary, consider whether it's more appropriate they should be choosing no religion. And if indeed their consideration is that they are religious, and we would encourage them 100% to continue to choose that religion. If they practice and they believe, then they should choose that religion. So we're not about deconverting. A couple of other things about the channels. You'll see that we've got a website, which is indicated there. We also have a Facebook page, which is, if any of you have been on it, you would see that it's getting a different post every day, and it's receiving a lot of attention. We are using 100% digital channels as well as our website and our Facebook. We're running a campaign through Facebook primarily, where we are targeting individuals with advertisements which are encouraging people to consider their choice when they complete the question. The core of our campaign really is about encouraging debate, reflection, conversations, and personal honesty in making their choice. Overall, the campaign has an ambition that we might achieve 40% no religion, but we've got a stretch target of 48%, which just so happens to be the result that they achieved in the New Zealand census. So 48% in New Zealand are identified as not religious. This next slide, just closing off, is just giving some samples of some of the resources that we've used. Again, with the expertise, superb expertise within our team, we have identified some reasons, some core reasons. We've tried to couch them in, if you like, marketing terms, and to create an attractive graphic which becomes part of the message to consider how religious you are. We also have created a number of slogans which we've gone through within the team, a rigorous brainstorming process to identify the ones that we felt were most appropriate. And these share graphics will be used on Facebook to try to convey the message in simple terms, you know, what it is that we're trying to achieve. So I'd like to leave it there and open up to questions and discussion in a more free-form way, and hope that what I said makes some sense and emphasizes the way the ABS is trying to facilitate more accurate answers, whilst at the same time presenting us with a question which really does need serious review. So thank you, Meredith.
Terrific, Michael. Thank you so much. Okay, we've got about 25 minutes of questions. If you do have a specific question, and there are already some in the chat box, could you please type them there? But there were some questions that were submitted prior or when people registered. So I thought I'd just kick off with some of those questions, Mike, if that's okay.
Sure, absolutely.
First one is from Alison Cortis, and she asks this: if someone writes atheist in the other box without marking no religion, how is that data recorded? So if they're atheist in other, does it count in the no religion data, or in the religion data, or in neither of those categories? And the same question applies for other sort of non-religious. I suppose if you put humanist or atheist, or humanist, atheist, rationalist, Pastafarian, whatever, how are those handled by the ABS?
Yeah, no problem. Look, the best way I think I can answer this, I've got a couple of resources which I've got ready to show. I was anticipating a question along these lines. So what I'm going to do is to share a spreadsheet which is summarizing the results from the 2016 census. And what I will show is that the way the census data gets reported at a course level is in 7 categories. So those are the 7 categories. There's also not stated and inadequately described. Now, to answer, Alison, I think, was the person that you identified. Sorry?
Oh, Alison.
Yeah, Alison, yeah. So the answer to Alison's question is that atheism is recorded here. It's recorded in this course group 7, which is called, and it's a mouthful, secular beliefs and other spiritual beliefs and no religious affiliation. And that, as a course group, comprises 30.1% of the population. So atheism gets grouped there, humanism gets grouped there, rationalism gets grouped there, and secular beliefs. So the people, the members, if you like, of the coalition that do belong to the various societies, if they were to choose their worldview, if you like, then it would be recorded in this category.
Not sure that I'm comfortable being bracketed with New Age. Anyway, let's move on to the second question from Catherine Wilson, who says, I've been reading Hugh Mackay's latest book called Beyond Belief, and he discusses the rise of spiritual but not religious. Actually, probably keep this slide on. I wonder what your thoughts are on this, please.
Yeah. I haven't read the book, I have to confess, but I'm aware of the sort of the broad message of it, and having not read the book, clearly it's actually a difficult question. Spirituality is itself subject to considerable debate, and is a very tricky one for people to put their hand on. Within the humanist group that I'm part of, there's at least 2 or 3 individuals that I can think of that have particularly strong views that there is no such thing as spiritualism. I'd contest that. My view is that, you know, it's spiritual to be inspired by something or to be in awe of something. But if that were to be translated through to a choice on the census, then I guess you'd be located here as well, under spiritual beliefs or your own spiritual beliefs.
Or 7399, other spiritual beliefs not elsewhere
classified.
Classified.
Yeah, classified, correct. Yeah,
right.
Yeah, that's true. The other thing I'd make about both the point about atheism and spiritual beliefs is that unfortunately it doesn't really contribute too much information, because we're put into this course group here that isn't really, frankly, paid very much attention to by policymakers. The strength of choosing no religion is watered down. And you can see that within this group, in fact, you know, people that actually do check the specific box, no religion, is 29.6%, as I've referenced through the presentation. Any other of those choices is clearly going to reduce that figure. So our advice as a campaign is that if you're in any way belonging to those worldviews or to any spiritual beliefs which fundamentally are about not religious, then please choose no religion.
Now, what about Pastafarianism?
Yes. Can I say welcome to the worshippers of the flying spaghetti monster? Us humanists and rationalists actually have much in common with them. They seem to like humour, and they like a drink, from what I understand. And
they like pasta.
Unfortunately, I think if you make such a choice, you're going to get recognised in this category down here called inadequately described. So the Pastafarians, there's no category for them. They're not going to get recorded. They won't get the satisfaction of seeing their religion, whether it's Pastafarianism or Jedi or anything similar, or chocolate or whatever it is. They are not going to get recorded and reported. They will get lumped into this category down here called inadequately described. Oh. And there were 106,000 of them last time around.
Oh, that's terrible.
So you'll lose any sense of identity. I'm afraid the colour
inadequately described.
The colour of the Pastafarians would be completely lost, which is a great shame.
Tanya, I hope that is not too depressing for you. There's a question from Nev Bray. What did the last 2 censuses say about numbers for religion?
Yep. Well, the 2016 ones, I think I did for formal religion. I think I gave you the no. My perspective is about no religion, so I guess you could say it's almost the opposite of that. 2016, 6.9 million chose no religion, which was 29.6%, as indicated there. If you were to take out the inadequately described and are not stated, which together is about 9.5%, take the 2 away, and you've got roughly around about 62% would be identifying with some form of formal religion. For your information, about 52% of those were classified as Christian. And again, for interest, you will see that the Christian list, here's Christianity. There are actually 97 different categories of Christianity. And it's quite bizarre. I always find it quite bizarre. They've got 1 category for Islam, despite the Sufis and the Shias and the Sunnis, and 1 category for Hinduism.
Let alone 1 category for Judaism.
And of course, Judaism, Sephardic, etc. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that sort of tells you something, doesn't it? Can I put in a question from one of our Canadian friends? This is from Balwinder Banala from Canada. Welcome, Balwinder. His question is this. My question is, at which age of a child or a teenager do we consider that they should be able to declare that his or her religion is, that he or she is a religious or non-religious person? So I guess it's, at what age do we think that that's a reasonable age to say, yes, they could seriously make that choice?
Yeah, look, I mean, clearly people's abilities to make these choices is going to vary according to individuals, and it will vary also according to the kind of background or the kind of upbringing they have. You know, as I indicated earlier, the Catholic Church says it should be the completion of the 7th year. The educationists would say that it's in that sort of period around the early teens. You know, people like Bloom and Piaget and many others, you know, would be suggesting that that's around about the age. But of course, that will vary from one individual to another. So it's somewhere in that early teens period, and certainly by late teens, people are usually quite strongly vociferous about how they want to identify themselves.
Yeah, but they might change. Commonly called the age of formal operations, where the child's brain can handle more complex and abstract matters. Yeah,
correct. Yeah.
Jeffrey Coe has a question. What about agnosticism? Is that categorized in no religion?
Well, this spreadsheet, which is proving very useful at the moment, agnosticism is classified here in this same category. So there were 26,000 that identified themselves as agnostic in the last census, contributing towards this group, which is the mouthful, which I won't repeat. One of the things I think should be brought to bear on the ABS is the renaming of that to reflect the overwhelming dominance of no religion, so that becomes more prominent in the description, in my view.
Let me read out something from Jeremy, who says, is the ABS looking at religious practice? I've looked for stats on religious observance or religious practice in Australia, and the best I could find, which were religious funded surveys, put it at about 16% of Australians attend religious service at least monthly. So approximately 84%, i.e. the 100% less, 84% of us don't attend religious surveys. The ABS question is blind to the majority. Your thoughts?
Yeah, look, agree 100%. I mean, the best standard that we can now use in terms of religious practice was presented to us last month by Neil Francis in his extraordinary work on looking at the data from the Australian Values Survey, the Australian Election Study, and the Australian Survey of Social Attitudes, which together provide a much richer perspective about religious practice. And the figure of 84% seems, for me, a little low, if anything. I was getting the impression that regular religious practice is something undertaken only by people, probably less than 10% of the population.
That'd be about right. If anybody's interested in looking at those statistics, they're on the Rationalist Society website. If you look at our publications, it's the first part. It's just called Religiosity in Australia, and wealth of information. Ian Lingard has a question. Do you have an idea or data of the geographic distribution or concentration of no religion throughout Australia?
An excellent question.
Why are you laughing?
Because I think some people know that there happens to be my little, sort of
That's your
pet topic
speciality
in geography. But it's an excellent question from my learned friend, and I congratulate him on asking that question. Again, as it happens, if I may just take just one brief second to the pattern is in fact quite striking if people are interested in geography. Let me just see if I can find the resource for that. There we are. Just bring that up now. What this is showing, and I'm sorry, it's quite complex, just focus on the blue lines. They're the most important ones really in this particular resource. It's showing that with our average line of 29.6, which I've referred to a few times, we can see quite marked variations in different parts of the country. So Greater Sydney and New South Wales, I'm afraid they're dragging their heels. I hope they're going to do better. You know, we've locked you down so that you can focus on the census and hopefully improve your results. And clearly, Hobart is a real standout, as is South Australia and Adelaide in particular. They really lead the way in terms of differences by sort of capital city. And I find it interesting also that, in fact, country areas do rather better than the city areas. And you can speculate why that might be. One way of trying to understand that, if I were to look at the next slide, which is this one here, it's a map of Greater Melbourne, and it's showing the no religion areas, the no religion suburbs in the Greater Melbourne area, red being the highest areas for no religion, and the blue being the lowest areas. And you will see that these areas, those people that know Melbourne, or indeed Sydney, it's a very similar pattern, those people that know Melbourne and Sydney will recognise that those are the areas of the highest migrant populations, with the caveat that they exclude people from East Asia, i.e. China and Korea and Vietnam. The answer is there are very, very clear differences from one suburb to another right across Australia and even at the state level. But the point I was trying to make is that these country areas of the major states tend to be higher than the city areas being somewhat brought down because of the high religious migrant groups which populate those areas.
Very interesting. Mike, just a practical question. Stella asks, will we all receive a census log in our letterbox or by email, a login?
Absolutely. The answer is yes. And I can tell you that my son and his partner received something in the mail this morning. They have filled out their form online. It took them 5 minutes. And it's been submitted already because they know where they're going to be on the 10th of August.
Yeah, right.
So the answer is yes, you will receive something in the mail in the next few days, probably, well, I thought it's going to be early next week. I was surprised it was actually today, but certainly early next week, you'll receive something in the mail giving you your the means by which you can record your answers.
Yeah. We're heading towards wrapping this up, but let me just say, Rani says, I think there should be a patheist, which will include atheist as well as many people who are religious only by name. I was thinking it should be people who are apathetic about the whole issue. I think that would be a good one. Apathetic. I'm an apatheist. David Upton asks, is the problem the people who construct these forms? How are they selected to do these jobs? Are they subject to strong scrutiny?
Presumably we're talking about the ABS census form. Yeah. The ABS, the form on the religion question has basically remained unchanged. The form of the question has remained unchanged for many, many years. The no religion option was only introduced in 1971. So you've only been able to choose no religion for the last 50 years. and clearly it's grown substantially from a zero base. Yes, they are expert, but they will always come back and say, we don't change the form because we need time series comparison and because we want to conform to international standards. The ABS is in cahoots all the time with the Canadian Census Bureau and the UK Office of National Statistics and the New Zealanders. They seem to come up with a common approach on most of the curly questions about the census.
No, Australia can't take the lead in anything. Rani just is explaining that a patheist is indeed someone who is not interested in accepting or rejecting any claims that gods exist or do not exist. So that's a good one. Ian Lingard has a question with an eye to the future. He asks, as the population ages, but migrant populations continue to grow, what does the future hold, do you think?
I wish I had a crystal ball for that one, but I think there is some indication, I think, even from the demographic, even from the age groups, that as people become more distant from their cultural roots as second generation, I don't have the slide, or I do have it, but I don't think I want to use it. There's a slide which is indicating that people of Southern European cultural background are in fact much closer to the average than I suspect they would have been 20 years ago or even 15, 30 years ago, whichever. So what I'm saying is the more distant they are from their cultural background, the more likelihood is that they're going to be adopting a more secular view of Australian society. But that's pure speculation. I do think that older people are going to be increasing substantially. Obviously, they're moving through. I think that age profile might look a little different this time around. I can't wait to see it. Sorry, I can't speculate on what that might look like then. It's an interesting question.
It is an interesting question. We've got a few people saying, go Hobart, yay Hobart. And yay South Australia, though lots of improvement needed.
Well, I noticed Peter Monk's on the webinar, and I congratulate him for representing the South Australians. He's doing a good job.
That's right. And Stella says, I've seen apparently on the Facebook pages of the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster and Pastafarians, they're having a great deal of a discussion and reasoning that in fact no religion is the way to go. So we're having some impact, I hope. But of course, Church of Flying Spaghetti Monster is still an important role to play in pushing for equality and secularism, as indeed is Satanism. If anybody hasn't actually read the principles of Satanism, they're fantastic. They're very sensible. They're very secular. They're liberal, progressive, all sorts of nice things. So go Satanists. But actually, are the Satanists on the list of other religions?
They go into that sixth category. Satanist is identified as an accepted religion, along with witchcraft or Wiccan, and they are identified in the sixth category, which is other religions.
It is. Oh, okay. So. Not a good idea.
It is considered a religion, yes.
So don't write Satanism in upper, write no religion.
Unless you are really a genuinely committed Satanist, in which case I'd encourage you to record it.
Stella is just saying that the Satanism pages are also pushing for no religion. Yay.
Oh, good, yes.
Terrific, that's great. Roxanne is also saying, starting a push with the Satanists choose no religion too. Most Satanists I'm aware of identify as atheist. Yes, so terrific. Mike, thank you so much. It's time that we really need to wrap this up so that people can go and have their own evenings to themselves. Thank you, everybody. And a huge thank you to our Canadian friends. I'm not quite sure what time it is over there, but really appreciate you reaching out and joining us for this webinar. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. we'll have more webinars in the future, and just watch out on the Rationalist Society website or Facebook site to the what's coming up next month. I think we're going to have a very special guests for those of you who are interested in the vexed question of religious instruction in schools. Looking at you, Alison, and other people. Okay.
Excellent.
Mike, thank you so much for all that information. Somebody mentioned that they had received their invitation from the ABS in their letterbox today. So now you've got all the information you need to go and fill in your census. Thanks, everybody. I'll call it a day. See you next time round. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.